Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. U.S. Representative and Senator from Oklahoma, James Mountain. Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Inhofe was born in Des Moines, Iowa on November 17, 1934. He grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he attended public schools and received a bachelor's degree from the University of Tulsa. He served in the U.S. Army and worked in aviation, real estate, and insurance for 3 decades. He was president of Quaker Life Insurance Company before entering politics. As a Republican, James Inhofe was elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives in 1966 and became a state senator in 1968. He ran unsuccessfully for governor in 1974 and for the U.S. House of Representatives in 1976. Inhofe was a 3-term mayor of Tulsa from 1978 to 1984. In 1986, running again for the U.S. House from the 1st District, he was elected and re-elected 3 more times. In 1994, when Senator David Boren resigned to become president of the University of Oklahoma, Inhofe ran for Boren's seat in a special election and won. Senator Inhofe was re-elected for a full term in 1996 and was re-elected to his 4th term November 16, 2014, ending January 3, 2021. This interview with Senator Jim Inhofe is made possible by the University of Tulsa, foundations, and friends who believe in preserving Oklahoma's legacy. On voicesofoklahoma.com.
Senator, if you'll state your full name, please, your date of birth, and your present age.
James Mountain Inhofe. I'm a member of the United States Senate. I was born November 17th, 1934. I just had my 79th birthday.
Where are we recording this interview?
In Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the St. John's building.
In your Senate home office here
That's
in
correct.
Tulsa. Significance of the name Mountain. What's it? You've been asked that millions of times.
Yeah, and people, for some reason, they always have to ask again. You'd think they'd remember. My mother's maiden name was Blanche Phoebe Mountain. Mountain was her name. Her family came over from France. My father's family came from Germany. So it was whatever the pronunciation in French for mountain, like montagne or whatever it was. They Americanized it and changed it to Mountain, Mountain. So I'm named after my mother. I have a son who's James Mountain Inhofe II and a grandson who's James Mountain Inhofe III.
Where were you born?
Des Moines, Iowa.
So how do you come to Oklahoma?
Well, we were in some level of poverty, I guess you'd say. Everyone was back then because that was back right after and during the Great Depression. So my dad had an opportunity in the insurance business here in Tulsa. And I always remember, because I was only 7 years old when we came. And the only thing I remember about Des Moines, Iowa, I was the youngest of 4 kids. I was in the kindergarten. And we'd walk to school. I couldn't see over the snowbanks. So I was never so glad to get out of a place as I was to get out of Iowa and down in good, warm. We considered it a part of the South at that time.
So then your father's name?
Perry Dyson Inhofe.
What kind of a person was he?
He is a very dominating type of a personality. At that time, the husband made virtually all of the decisions, but he was one who really didn't have any doubt about anything that he said being true, almost to a fault.
Do you draw anything from him in your personality or the way you take
No, I really
business?
don't think so. I think, if anything, I'm more inclined to be the opposite, maybe as a result of that.
And then your mother's name again?
Blanche Phoebe Mountain, then, of course, Inhofe.
So mother and father meet in Iowa.
Well, this is kind of interesting. I've been a pilot for many, many years, since I was a little kid. I remember every Memorial Day, I used to fly my parents back to Cumberland, Iowa. That's where all of the Inhofes came from, Germany to Cumberland, Iowa. And if you go to the cemetery in Cumberland, Iowa, almost every stone is an Inhofe. And we would go there and then go back to his old farmhouse where it would have been 1907. When he was 6 years old, he drew his name in the concrete that they had poured. And I remember picking that up and bringing it all the way back. We now still have it as a coffee table. But in that farm in Cumberland, Iowa, down at the corner was a little one-room schoolhouse. My mother was the school marm at that time. There was just a one-room country schoolhouse, one teacher, and that's it. Well, they got together because that adjoined the farm where he was. And so that's how all of that happened.
Your mother's personality. Describe her personality.
She was the one to prepare everything so that when my father came home, whether it was a matter of entertaining customers or whatever it was, she kind of assumed that role of doing, I would almost say doing what she was told, but that's not right, doing what was expected of her.
And again, he was a salesman?
No, he was actually in the claims end of insurance and ended up buying a company that had some level of success. So we went to a more prosperous life than we had in Des Moines. One other thing about Des Moines that's interesting, my dad was a claims adjuster in a building where Ronald Reagan was an announcer for WHO radio, a sports announcer. They played the pinball machine together. He would come out of the house. I always thought he was an uncle or some relative. And when we moved from Des Moines and through Springfield to Tulsa, we were not very well off, never went to movies or anything, except if there is a Dutch Reagan movie, which is what my dad called it. We would drive, I remember one time it was way down in Durant or someplace, and that was before turnpikes. We drove for like 6 hours to watch a Dutch Reagan movie.
So you saw Ronald Reagan as a boy?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's the reason back in the days when you and I were going back and forth during the 8 years I was mayor of Tulsa. If you'll recall, Ronald Reagan came into office and I handled his domestic agenda. I would appear on all the TV shows saying what we should be doing. As a matter of fact, it was Ronald Reagan that used the low-water dam that I, quite frankly, put together against a lot of opposition as the largest public project in America that was totally privately funded. That was Ronald Reagan. I worked very closely with him during the years that he was president.
Brothers and sisters you have?
Yes, I have originally two sisters, older. One is deceased, and I have one other brother.
The first school you attended would have been in Iowa?
Des Moines, Iowa. That was just a half year for kindergarten. But after that, there was one interim move before coming to Tulsa. That was going to Springfield, Illinois. It was actually out in the country outside of Springfield, Illinois. I went to a country schoolhouse there called Hazel Dell. Hazel Dell is just like you close your eyes and envision what Hazel Dell would look like. It was a one-room country schoolhouse. We had a guy named Harvey Bean, who was the school marm. He was a frightening person, I think maybe 7 feet tall in my memory. There are 7 grades in one room, and the 7 grades were in 7 rows. So if you miss a spelling word, you'd have to go up in front of the class and bend over, and you had a great big paddle, and you'd swat you with it. And I was a pretty good speller. And so anyway, the schoolhouse burned down. I was at that time in the first grade, and they didn't rebuild it, so I missed the first grade. When we came to Tulsa, I was in the second grade, but in those days, they put you in whatever age you were, so I never went to the first grade. And that's one reason I've always been a kind of a slow reader, or at least that's what we analyzed, because I started in the second grade instead of the first grade.
And what elementary school here?
Barnard.
Barnard.
And it broke my heart when Barnard Elementary School broke down. I can tell you almost everyone who went there that I knew later on, and many of the teachers. That was a memorable time.
Can you name a person, one or two, that went there?
Oh, yes. Jody Shelton was my first girlfriend. Rosetta Robinowitz, my second girlfriend. I can remember so well because at that time, I lived way out right on the city limits around 32nd Street. That's where the city limits were then. Barnard was on 17th in Lewis. So I'd ride my bike to school. And Lewis at that time was a one-lane road, and you'd ride on the dirt beside it. Now, it's interesting because the girl that I married lived right across the street from me, but she went to Elliott. At that time, and it was during the tail end of the war, You went wherever you can get a ride because of gas shortages and all that. And it happened that I can get a ride there and she can get a ride to Elliott. So while we lived next door to each other, we went to 2 different elementary schools.
When did you actually start dating her? When did you know you were interested in her?
Really funny because she was born in the house right across the street from where we live now. We bought the house across the street. It's an older section of town. The furthest my wife has moved in her entire life is 32 feet, right across the street. We didn't date at all during that time until after I came back from the Army, and it all started then.
And her name is?
It was Kay Kirkpatrick.
Then your junior high school here in Tulsa? Woodrow Wilson. Then you went on to what high school?
Central.
And then you graduated from Tulsa Central in?
1953.
Anything memorable about Tulsa Central? Were you involved in activities or anything?
You know, there really wasn't. I detested junior high school in Woodrow Wilson, and I'm not really sure why, but I dreaded every day I had to go in there. But I really liked the high school. It was one of the largest high schools around in Oklahoma. So you didn't go out for a whole lot of different sports. I was a track guy. We had a guy that was a coach that used me as an example that you can make a state champion out of someone with no talent at all if he has the heart for it. I remember just really good things about Central High School, enjoyed it immensely.
So did you become accomplished as a track person?
Yeah, I was involved on the state champion team. Bill Lance was the coach. He's a legend. He's the one who started, was involved in Kennecott Camp over in Missouri. They now have 7 of them. It's more of a Jesus-based type of a camp. All of my kids went there, and now my grandkids are there. In fact, we sponsor them and have them go there. It all started with a guy named Bill Lance. He was my mentor. In fact, when they dedicated the field, the athletic field, to him, I was in the state senate, and I went over there and gave the dedication speech. I always remember that.
Any other names that graduated from your Tulsa Central class?
The Timberlakes, Bob Timberlake was the one that would have been my age. Prior to that, we had King Days at Central High School, and it may still be the same way, even though the building's not the same. The most popular male student was called the King Days, D-A-Z-E, and the woman was Queen Days. Buddy Martin and Susie Spencer were the 2, and they got married.
Where would you, as high school people, hang out in Tulsa?
Well, in high school, it's called Quaker Drugstore on 18th and about Boston area. That was where everybody hung out from Central High School.
How about up in Peoria? Wasn't there a drive-in up there? Pennington's?
Oh, there was. Pennington's drive-in. Now, one of the guys, the people whose names would always be remembered as graduating with my class at Central, was Bobby Gilbert. Bobby Gilbert married Linda Pennington. Pennington's was the name of the drive-in. That's where that connection was. Pennington's was a very popular hangout that high school people went to.
Then what happens to you as you graduate from Tulsa Central? What do you do next?
Well, I graduated from Central, and I went to the University of Colorado. Not many people realize that. I was only there 3 months. They were not very impressive months. That was back when they first discovered uranium. I was bartending up there. Tulagis was the largest 3-2 bar in America. That was in Boulder, Colorado, and I was the head bartender. And I had a guy that came in from the Okefenokee Swamp that was in school there. He convinced me that we can go back in what they call the White River Forest area in Colorado, and where they had all the gold mines. You've heard the term fool's gold. That is when they see this gold-colored stuff, and they'd chip it off and take it out. And it was not gold. But what was it? It was uranium. It was carnotite. So I crawled through. It's amazing that I'm not buried under those rocks somewhere. I took my chisel and I went back there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Of course, just dropped out of school. We staked several claims at the Atomic Energy in Denver, but they're never with the quantity to be of value. So that was my glorious career in Colorado. Then I decided I'd always kind of done pretty well in the Spanish language, and I enjoyed it. So I decided I was going to go to University of Mexico. Well, I was back in the University of Colorado at that time. So if I took my finals early, I can have them done before the Christmas holidays, because the semester started outside of Mexico City on about the 3rd of January. So that all worked out. And I went home and I got all ready, actually packed my car. I was ready to go. And I got a letter from Ike. And it said, "Greetings. I was drafted into the United States Army." Now, back in those days, you're drafted, you're there. Quite frankly, as the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee today, I'm the only one on the Armed Services Committee who still believes in compulsory service. Because a lot of the social problems that we have today, we wouldn't have if those kids had to go through the discipline that I had to go through. I fought it tooth and nail. I didn't want to go to the United States Army, but I did. Anyway, I was drafted. So what I did is I went to 9 different colleges and universities. When they say, "Where'd you go to school?" Wherever I was stationed, I went to night school, like Washington, D.C., University of Virginia, Virginia Polytechnic Institute, University, all those places.
So in 1956, then you were drafted, and then 2 years in the Army.
That's correct.
What was your training in the Army?
Well, I was in the quartermaster station most of the time at Fort Lee, Virginia. I was in the headquarters detachment. Now, the significance of that is, if you're an enlisted man as opposed to an officer, you're at the bottom of the barrel. However, that was the first year that they started using specialists. So instead of being necessarily a PFC, you'd be a specialist third class. And a specialist was one where you didn't have stripes on your sleeves if you were in the headquarters detachment, and I was. So everybody thought I was an officer. Mine was just the typical headquarters type of duty. By the way, I was also drafted the same month, I believe, as Elvis Presley. Oh. He had a little better duty than I did. I wanted to get to Germany, and he got there. I didn't.
Let me jump back here to December 7th, 1941. I believe you would have been 7 years old. Do you have any recollection of what happened?
I do, because I was living in Springfield, Illinois at that time. We were a first generation back from Germany. And so we were under suspicion at that time because we were Germans. There was no more patriotic man in America than my father was. He had bad eyesight. He tried to get in the Air Force. He tried to get in the Army. He was the strongest patriot in the United States, and yet people were suspicious of us because of our German background. That's what I remember about it, and I remember also at that time, and then, of course, we moved to Tulsa. When you went to a movie, they didn't have TV, so kids would, on Saturday morning, would go to the movies, and I would go. And all you'd ever see on the news was the war effort, mostly in Germany and Japan. One of the things that shocked me after the war is over is, what are they going to have on news? What is there to be newsy about? Occasionally, I was sent to Chicago. I had an aunt, my dad's sister, an aunt and uncle that were very close, and they lived up there in an apartment house that I thought was pretty fancy. Now, if you go back, it really wasn't very fancy, but it was this giant building. It was 7 stories high. I remember being there during the surrender, during VE Day, Victory in Europe.
1945.
And seeing the parades and all of that. So I was right in the middle of a major area when that happened.
The rationing that went on, did that affect you?
I remember all that so well, trying to find gasoline, and my mother made all the butter and churned it and all that. And everybody else did, too.
Tires were tough to get?
Yeah, rubber was impossible because all of that went to the war effort.
And even nylons for ladies?
Nylons was the great swapping material for our troops over in places like Germany.
Tell us why.
Well, because, you see a pretty girl, they don't care about diamonds, but nylons, they like nylons.
Are you trained to be a pilot back here in the military, or where does your...
No, when I got out of the Army, at that time, let's say 1958, you could become a licensed pilot for $36. It took 8 hours, and it's $4 an hour. That was for an instructor, the airplane, and the fuel. And I thought, why not do it? And I did. For some reason, I've always been in a position where I use aviation. Today is a good example, too. I just go all over the state, and people kind of laugh about it. I remember not long ago being down in Altus, and they said, "Are you ever in Washington?" So I've been using aviation all my life.
How old were you when you got your pilot's license?
28.
Did you have an interest in flying for a long time?
I always was fascinated by flying, and I'd go out to Harvey Young Airport, and there are a couple others. One was Baird. It's not there anymore. Wash planes and do things like that. It was fascinating with flying.
It didn't come from your father or family. It was just you were born with this
no,
interest.
It didn't, because I didn't have anyone in any of my family that ever flew, but it was always of great interest to me, and I was just fascinated by it, and that's endured a lot of years now.
When you come out of the Army, then is that when you get into various business-related items?
Well, first of all, I started long before I was in the Army. My dad had made a deal with my brother and me. If you work, by the time you're 16 years old, whatever you earn, I will match and you can buy your first car. And so I went out. I was always, I can say now because enough time has passed, I was really a good salesman. I could sell anything. I was a Fuller brush man. Now, people don't know what that is today. But a Fuller brush man is a guy that goes around from door to door. I lied about my age because you had to have a car license. So when I was 15 years old, I set records that were the best sales records in the Fuller brush world, which doesn't mean anything today, but it did at that time. And anything else that I could sell, I would. I remember our backyard being the city limits. Back there are wild blackberries, and there's a heavy Indian population that lived back in the woods.
Where is this?
Here in Tulsa.
Okay.
Anything south of 32nd Street was wooded area outside the city limits. But I'd go back and hire Indians to pick wild blackberries, and I'd sell them around the neighborhood. I was always pretty enterprising in sales.
And so somewhere you knew you could almost sell anything, right?
No, I did.
Then you worked in the field of aviation?
I did some work in that, but that was more of just to support the habit.
Became a real estate developer?
I did some real estate developing. I did insurance work. Yeah, I'd say insurance, aviation, and real estate.
And then did you purchase or did you build the Quaker Life Insurance Company?
That was actually started as a subsidiary of a very large property and casualty company. We had it for a short period of time. The year was about the early 80s when almost everything went under. That was the first major recession in contemporary history of Tulsa. Mm-hmm. So we lost that. That's when I started developing and doing things like that, primarily in Texas.
Your political life, what led you to become involved at all? And I think we're talking about back in the 60s then?
Yeah, it would have been 65. I was always, almost to a fault, a conservative. Some people would say today extremist at that time, but I really felt that things were going the wrong direction. So at the state level, I started working in people's campaigns. Then when Dewey Bartlett, not the mayor, but when Dewey Bartlett's dad, Dewey Bartlett, was in the state Senate, he ran for governor, and he won. And it was my job working in the party to help find someone to run for the vacancy that occurred as a result of his being elected as governor of Oklahoma. And so I ran for it myself.
In 1967. You said you were conservative. Was that through reading or listening or mentors?
Well, a lot of it came from different personalities that would give speeches. I was always very partial to the conservatives. For example, in the early years of Reagan, I guess even Ford was involved at that time, I think, and then Bush a little bit later. I always fell on the side, not because we had that relationship with Reagan, but with the conservatives. Barry Goldwater before that. So I just had always listened to and believed that small government is better.
In the state of Oklahoma, the Democrats in the 60s ran the state.
It was laughable to think that a Republican could win anything statewide because it was all Democrats. It gradually was changing. But in 1994 is the big change. That was the first year I ran for the United States Senate. I remember my campaign was critical of me because I was flying, using my flying background, all over the state. The southern tier of counties, about 10 of them, there are just no Republicans there at all. None. I'd spent a lot of time down there. I said, if you're wasting your time. Why are you going down there, spending so much time there? At that time, I really thought we had hopes down there because the Democrats had become very, very liberal, to the extent that if you go down there, the Democrats are all conservative at that time. I'm talking about pre-1994. In terms of abortion rights, in terms of war, of all the issues. And that's where the saying God, gays, and guns all started down there. That's where it was originated. And I ended up being the first one to carry all those counties down there.
In the Senate race you're talking about?
Senate race in 1994.
Yep.
Because I explained to them what we were for. This is significant because there was my opponent, Dave McCurdy. Dave McCurdy was a thing of beauty. He had served for 16 years in the House. He was a beautiful person. He was one of them that was the darling. He made one mistake, and that is he moved back there and never came back to Oklahoma. So during that race, Since I had been there 8 years in the House, all I had to do was show people how he and I voted on the same thing. And that's where I always remember. I hesitate to say this, knowing that this would be used places people would offend them, but, it's still significant. There's a New York Times lady in Washington, in the Capitol, with the Capitol Bureau. She hated me with a passion, and she loved Dave McCurdy. We started out 32 points behind. Keep in mind, this is a Democrat state. Slowly we saw our lines coming up, and we knew they were crossing them about 3 weeks before the election. And so I knew I was going to win at that time. She didn't know it, and she called me up, and she said, Inhofe, you won't like this any better than I do, but I've got to travel with you one day because this was a nationwide race. People were all watching it. I said, that's fine. I'd love to have you, but at Riverside Airport at 6 a.m. in the morning, you can go with me. If you're not there, I'm going without you. She showed up. I said, I got good news and bad news. What do you want first? She said, well, what's the bad news? The bad news is I was actually flying 3 different airplanes, keeping one working because I was in the air all day, every day. I came back in my big twin engine. I lost an engine last night. So you have to go in a small plane. She said, yeah, what's the good news? I said, we are going to McCurtain County. There aren't any Republicans in McCurtain County. You'll love it there. So we went down there, and I did a barrel roll on the way down, tipped her upside down, knowing she'd never get back in the plane again. And it worked. I never knew what happened to her after she was down there. She may still be down there. But we went to this meeting, and all of these people were in, I'd say there are 40 or 50 people down there in McCurtain County. And a guy stood up and he said, Inhofe, I want you to know you're going to be the first Republican in the history of McCurtain County to carry the county. I said, that's great. Why? Now, she was sitting there all this time. She said, because of the 3 Gs. I said, what are the 3 Gs? And they said, God, gays, and guns. Those are the 3 driving issues in the campaign of 1994, where the Democrats and Republicans alike were on my side of those issues as opposed to his. That's when we just surged ahead and it was over.
Didn't other Republicans, maybe in other parts of the United States, use that same theme?
Oh,
it came right out of...
It's 2 years later they started using it.
Yeah.
That's where it originated. I can't even tell you the name of the town. It may not have been in a town. I just know that there was a gathering in McCurtain County.
So that's in 94. Let me come back here to the state in the 60s. Mm-hmm. I interviewed last week Al Snipes, who began building the Republican Party in the late 50s and the 60s.
All right. Al Snipes was in the conservative wing of the Republican Party. At that time, there was a division between the moderates and the conservatives. It's not quite that true today, but somewhat is true. So Al Snipes, he probably told you that he and I were very close. I mean, we were, and we still are today. He's still alive.
Yeah, he's now 89 years old.
Oh, is he? He's older than I was.
But his big to-do was with Henry Bellman, and Henry Bellman wasn't as conservative as he was, and you maybe even have a comment on that. They kind of had a love-hate relationship is what I could draw from that situation.
Well, the problem that Henry was never really conservative. The Panama Canal vote was the killer for Henry Bellman. That lost virtually all of the Oklahoma conservatives. Well, nationwide. That was a huge issue, if you remember. The vote on the Panama Canal went down, as I recall, to 1 vote. And he cast that vote. And it was characterized as giving away the Panama Canal.
Right. But then Henry, that was when he was senator, came back then and ran for governor and was elected.
That's correct.
Even though the state was very much opposed to that 1 vote. So that's an interesting scenario.
Henry Bellman, and I liked Henry real well. He was never a real conservative. Dewey Bartlett was much more conservative. I'm talking about Governor Dewey Bartlett and United States Senator Dewey Bartlett. Al
Snipes talked a lot about Dewey Bartlett, and those two were very close because they were conservative.
Mm-hmm.
You run for governor in 1974. You lost 57 pounds during that race.
But the race was significant for another reason. When Dewey Bartlett won governor of Oklahoma, 4 years later, he ran for re-election. He was defeated by David Hall. David Hall was corrupt. In fact, I'm the one who took the statements, did the research that sent him to the federal penitentiary. David Hall, it was just a horrible thing that we went through. Well, my closest friend was a Democrat who was elected the same year I was. His name was David Boren. David Boren and I were, this gets a little complicated because 2 years after I was elected to the state house, I was kicked out of the House. And I'm still the only member of the House of Representatives who was kicked out. At that time, I was kind of a loudmouth, and they changed the district so that they cornered me out of a district, put me in a North Tulsa district that was 85% Democrat, but I won anyway. So I was in the state Senate. David Bourne was in the state House. He was a Democrat. I was a Republican. So we introduced all the reform, like the investment of state funds for the state treasurer and others. None of them ever passed, but we were the authors. We were both offended by David Hall. And so we developed something that we can defeat him. David Bourne would run for governor as a Democrat in a primary against David Hall. I would run as a Republican, and my primary opponent was Denny Garrison. I would win my primary. David Bourne would lose his primary. Who was going to vote at that time for someone when David Hall just controlled the party? So we went through 2 years of campaigning. David Bourne saying nothing but nice things about me saying nothing but nice things about him, and lo and behold, he wins the primary. How do you run against a guy in a state like Oklahoma when you've been praising him for the last 2 years? And, of course, it was over.
I should have said you were elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives from 67 to 69, and then you ran and won for the Oklahoma Senate, where you served 8 years. And some of this, when you were running for governor, you continued in the state Senate. You still remember the state Senate. But you lost to David Bourne. How did you handle that defeat? Did you ever think you'd run again for office? Was that?
Oh, no. No, that was all unique because I knew for a fact I would lose to David Bourne. But I knew for a fact that if David Hall wins the primary, I would win because that's what we put together. The unexpected that happened was that he won. So it turned out fine in terms I was still at that time in the state Senate. David Bourne and I to this day, in fact, this may surprise you, even though he's the president of Oklahoma University, he is supporting me in my re-election bid, and he's already contributed and all that. So we've maintained that close friendship all these years.
And I need to jump back again because you did go to college at Tulsa University and earned a degree there.
I normally characterize the college thing as going to all those different colleges at night school, which I did. And then when I was out of the service, I backed the truck up and shoveled off the transcripts, and they said, "You're an economist at TU." I went to TU, I think, 2 semesters.
You got a degree there in 1973 from Tulsa University.
Yeah.
But largely your work had been bouncing around in these other universities.
That's true. I had one of them. I'd go to night school from Fort Lee, Virginia, up to University of Richmond almost every night. I went up with 2 guys who had been drafted also in the same headquarters detachment at Fort Lee, Virginia as I was in, and we travel up together. They were both morticians. They chalked shop all the way up, and they subscribed to the Mid-Continent Mortician in Casket and Sunnyside. One of them had actually built a summer home out of embalming fluid bottles. Anyway, I spent a whole year learning all about...
It didn't cause you to want to be one.
No, it didn't.
So then we come up to 1976, and you ran for Oklahoma's 1st district, which includes Tulsa. You defeated Frank Keating and Mary Warner in the primary. The incumbent then is the Democrat James R. Jones. A little bit about that campaign that may stick out in your mind. Ultimately, you lost to him, which may or may not have been a surprise, but he had been an incumbent, and for a Republican to come along to defeat this Democrat would probably be high stakes.
Yeah, it was an uphill race. Frank clearly would have the country club set and all that, but I beat him like a drum in that primary.
And why do you think you did?
Well, because I had organization. One thing I learned a long time ago in the Republican Party, you can win with organization. You don't really need money. By organization, I'm talking about, for example, we used what was called the Caston Plan. Bob Caston was a guy from Wisconsin who designed this thing where you have each precinct organized to a level of everybody knows everybody in it, and you have goals for each block within the precinct and all that, as is today. I have volunteers and others don't. They used to joke around, well, if the primary had been held in the bar at Southern Hills, then clearly Keating would have won. But it wasn't.
That was an uphill climb. Did you think you were going to win? Not at all.
No, I knew I was going to win the primary.
You just knew that.
Oh, absolutely. I was absolutely certain of that.
Because you had the grassroots support.
Yeah. But it was almost a duty. We were at that time trying to key out certain races where Republicans were on the rise. Oklahoma's 1st district was one of those. Now, keep in mind, that was a district race. That was before redistricting took place. and had all of North Tulsa County and none of the Broken Arrow, the South Tulsa County, where all the Republicans were. So when I won that, Mike Sinar was the second district. So he always had Tulsa and Broken Arrow and all the Republicans. Well, after I won that twice, they decided I was going to continue to win it. So they all got together and gave him all of my Democrats, gave me all of his Republicans. That's how it happened.
So there is another loss, and I don't know what you're thinking about this. Should I ever run for office ever again? Did that ever occur to you at all?
No, it really didn't. And people would make fun of me on that. I remember one cartoon in the Tulsa World. When I won the mayor's race, they had a picture of me running and losing in the governor's race, a picture of me running and losing. It was when Simpson was a cartoonist. Remember him?
David Simpson.
Yeah, he was really good. Mm-hmm. And he didn't care much for me, so he did a good job on me. It showed me, and the caption was, "You finally found one you could win, huh?" And that's true.
Well, that was in 1978. Mm-hmm. You ran for mayor of Tulsa, and you defeated the Democrat Roger Randall. I particularly remember that because KRMG, where I worked for many years,
that's right,
editorialized in support of you. I remember the next day after the election, you came up to the radio station,
I remember that,
and you thanked Gary Swanson, or maybe it was Ron Blue, for their support. The door was open from my studio, and I can still see you walking by. You walked into that office.
Yeah,
but
I always did that.
You came back and said, thank you.
I forgot about that.
While you're mayor, 8 years as mayor?
Mm-hmm. 4 terms, 2-year terms.
One of the most notable things, and you were pretty progressive as a mayor, I believed, was the Zink Dam that you referred to earlier, the low water dam. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Okay, really, I'm still very proud. And I mentioned already that Reagan used that as the largest public project that was privately funded. And this is how I did it. There's a West Tulsa stigma at that time. If you lived west of the river, the real estate values were down. It was more of an impoverished area. And it went right along the river. So we had some urban renewal land that we couldn't give away. I mean, there's nothing you could do with it. So I went to the Home Builders Association. I always remember this. I said, we can buy this land right now for X number of dollars an acre. Now, what would it be worth to you in developing that west of the river if we put a beautiful dam there with a beautiful lake and all of that? And they said, well, the value would be. And I took the difference in the value between it as just an old smelly river and it as a lake with all of the really affluent development that was going on west of the river. I used that money to build a dam that gave it its value.
How did you come to call it the Zink Dam?
Because we were $1 million short and he had $1 million. We had $7 million. We needed another $1 million. And
did you personally ask for the money?
Yeah.
Was it pretty easy?
If you name it Zink.
Yeah. No problem with that.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't care about Inhofe.
No.
And incidentally, I know you'll get to this in a minute, but I lost the last race to none other than Terry Young, who is not all that formidable, most people thought. And prior to that, I'd already put together something where we were going to have 2 more dams built the same way, one downstream and one upstream from the current dam. So we'd have that whole thing going across there. That was a doable thing, and we'd already started it. Secondly, downtown was going down. You might remember that I put together a thing that would be a rail system that went from downtown all the way out to ORU, which was kind of on the boom at that time. Then it came around and caught all of the developments, stores, for example, with South Roads. I went through and asked them if we would establish this as a special assessment district, which at that time, I think it's still in the books, you can do in Oklahoma. Would you support that so we could have all these special assessment districts? And we were having a monorail go from downtown all the way to ORU and coming back by all those places. All of that was in the middle, and I lost the race. The best thing ever happened to me, but I lost the re-election.
You lost the race to Terry Young, a Democrat, and why did you lose that race?
The main reason I lost it is because we had a very aggressive street project. When I became mayor, a lot of the infrastructure had not been anything done to it. And I started the 1 cent temporary sales tax for capital improvements, water, sewage, and streets. We are aggressively building streets. A lot of it was in South Tulsa. That's where the population was going. During that summer, it was a very hot summer. The traffic just stopped, and people were stopped out in the streets. And I saw my numbers start going down in the areas that are normally strong Republican. It was because we were too progressive, you use the word, in getting all these things done. But that's what we're supposed to be doing. That actually made the margin of defeat. And we measured that. We knew that was coming.
Was that one of your toughest defeats?
Oh, it was the toughest defeat because I had no respect for Terry Young. He was involved in a lot of things that I would rather you find from other people because it's well publicized.
Well, maybe at that point, almost anybody who could come along as a Democrat to oppose maybe would have done it.
He had a following. He was a weatherman for a TV station.
Channel 8, right.
So he had a following. He was attractive. He was handsome. He was pretty well spoken.
Yeah.
So he was not a dog candidate. It's just that he's one that we know pretty much what happened.
You said that was a good thing for you to lose. Why was it a good thing?
Well, it was a good thing because I never liked city issues that much. There's a guy named Richard Sudrette. Richard at that time was at Tulsa University. He was a college kid. The guy was a genius in areas in city government. He had worked for John Thomas, who's deceased now, but he was a commissioner. One of the four at that time we had the commission form of government. We had a mayor and 4 commissioners. It was the real strong mayor form of government because the mayor did all the hiring and firing for all the commissioners and all that. So that's how I was able to get a lot of things done. They'd come to me when Bob LaFortune had decided he was going to retire. They ran a poll, and they said Inhofe's the only one that would have a shot at winning that mayor's race. They came to me, and I said, I'm really not interested. And I finally said, no, I don't know anything about city government, and I'm really not interested in city government. The boy genius was Richard Sudrette. He came in and tried to talk me into it. I said, Richard, if I did this, would you be my administrative assistant? He said, well, of course, I have to get the blessing from John Thomas. So I went with him to John Thomas. We caught him at a weak moment and said, John, I guess I'm going to run for mayor if Richard can be my chief of staff. He's now your chief of staff. You release him, I'll run. Well, if that's what Richard wants to do, and Richard said, yeah, that's what I want to do, and off we went. So it was done, which he didn't expect. Now, you have to understand Richard Sudrette, and you remember him, I'm sure.
I do.
He had this, he's really a boring guy. He was one of the funniest guys in the world, but he talked very slow and very monotonous. So I said, Richard, you're going to have to make me an expert on city government. He said, I want you to put on these tapes. I'll never forget the one, History of Urban Renewal in the city of Tulsa. I could never listen more than 3 minutes without falling asleep. So I still have his old records around that I use when I really am in need of it. So Richard has started a whole new era, and it ended up being an enjoyable job, but a real hard job. Because, you know, there's no hiding. I always tell my friends in the United States Senate, you want a hard job, be a mayor of a city. There's no hiding place.
All eyes are on you.
If they don't like the trash system, it ends up in your front yard. Which it did.
Is that true?
Yes, it's true.
Okay, so you said it was an enjoyable experience. You glad you had that? Did that serve you, that experience, later on in government?
It did. It did. And the lesson I learned there was one I kind of carried on from being in the state legislature and the state senate, because I would do things without considering the political consequences. And that's been the best lesson I've ever learned. Now, I lost in that mayor's race because I was aggressively going after doing the things I thought I was supposed to be doing. But on the other hand, I went from there to the House. In the House, I passed what was characterized by the Wall Street Journal as the greatest single reform in the history of the House of Representatives in Washington, the discharge petition.
And I'm going to get to that. So then in 84 you lose, but then in 86 you run for 1st District again. Is that because Jim Jones decided to run for the U.S. Senate and you win the Republican primary? Is that something you had your eye on? Did somebody have to coax you into it?
No, because I went out. Well, I went out of the mayor's. I defeated
in 84.
There was 86 then?
Yes, 1986.
Oh, okay, in 86. Yeah, because I just told you I never liked local issues, but I love national issues. I like the defense issues. I like the things you can do at that level. And that's where most of the spending problems and all that. So, yes, I wanted to do that. I was going to run anyway. I actually had announced, I think, before Jim Jones made his mind up. I'd have to go back and research that. I'd already said I was going to run.
I guess when you ran for the last time for mayor, you had so many things going that you felt you wanted another couple of years to make that happen because you really weren't enjoying, or maybe you were having fun as mayor?
Well, I was
surprised.
finally. It was hard, but 2 more low water dams in the tract going around Tulsa. Those were huge things that I really was excited about.
You took in the Low River Dam and the river. As you know, KRMG had the great raft race, which led to the River Parks Authority and drew attention to the river, as a matter of fact. And they were the ones who did that. You participated, I'm sure, a few times in the Great Raft.
Absolutely.
And had rafts in it, that type of thing. So then in 86, you run, and then in the general, you defeated Gary Allison. A little bit about that campaign.
Gary Allison was a very proud liberal. And I say that because most of the Democrats who vote liberal run as conservatives. And I'm talking about the House and the Senate. But not Gary Allison. He was a university professor. I knew a lot of the people that knew him very well. One was the father of the judge down here.
Current judge?
Yeah, his son is. And I appointed him. Okay. He's on the federal bench. Really a good guy. His dad was a conservative law professor at the University of Tulsa. He really didn't like Gary Allison because Gary Allison symbolizes the real liberal at the University of Tulsa on the staff. So that race was a fairly easy race because it's just conservative versus liberal. His agenda was one that sounded real good when you're behind closed doors in the University of Tulsa, but not to the general public.
Plus, your name was really embedded in this community for the elections and what you'd run before. So you had a high name recognition factor going for you.
I'm not sure what my favorables were at that time, but they're respectable, I think.
Yeah. And it's a time then when the Republicans are gaining stronger hold in the state and in our district.
That's right. And then you got to keep in mind now, that was a race in the old district that was a strong 85% Democrat race. That's what it was when I ran. Then the next time it was also that way, and I think that my opponent at that time was Kirk Glasgow.
Yes. And
right. Kirk Glasgow is another proud liberal. Not quite as proud because he saw the handwriting on the wall. But after winning those 2 races, that's when they decided that they would go ahead and give Mike Sinar, my Democrats, and I'd take his Republicans after redistricting. And after that, like it is today, it's one of the strongest in the nation.
And then you won re-election in 92.
I ran 3 times in the old district. I had 3 tough races. Then they changed the district, so it was an easy district after that. But I only ran once in the district as an easy district when it turned out to be just solid Republican, and that was the laydown. So
when you're a member then of the U.S. House of Representatives in 1987, this brings up President Ronald Reagan. You voted against the president's budget, which included tax increases and no increase for defense spending. Here is this man that you've idolized all these years, and you voted against it. Tell us what was going on.
Well, that's my first realization that, in my judgment, he made some mistakes. And I think in the case of his tax increases, he later on said, this is something we shouldn't have done. Now, it's not accurate to say that he wasn't a strong national defense, because he was. Keep in mind, he inherited the Carter years. And the Carter years were the hollow force, the years of the hollow force, when he had to rebuild the military from almost the same as we did right after the Clinton years. You know, and we reduced the size of the military by 40%. And so now, anyway, history is repeating itself now with Obama in there. But at that time, I didn't think he was as aggressive as he should have been in rebuilding the defense, but he was still very aggressive, and he successfully did it.
Did you feel any personal pressure from him? Did he say, Jim, I need you on this vote, or I know you're going to vote against me? Did any of that go on?
No. Something he never once did.
While in the House of Representatives, you came to national attention in 93 when you led the effort to reform the House's discharge petition. Explain for our audience, what is a discharge petition?
It's complicated, but way back 60 years before that, the Speaker of the House was a Democrat from Texas. He had set up a system, and at that time, they thought the House of Representatives in Washington would never be Republican. I mean, the Republicans had no strength there at all. It was all Democrat. Keep in mind, he was from Texas, where they're pretty conservative. They devised a system that would allow the Democrats to vote straight liberal and yet press release conservative and get by with it by hiding from the people back home how they voted on these various issues. gun control in Texas, for example. They had to vote because Democrats are disciplined. They do what they're told. So these Democrats down in Texas had to vote for gun control, but they did it in such a way that the only way you could get a bill out of a committee was to vote it out, except for a discharge petition. So when they wanted to have a discharge petition to allow a vote to come out that they would otherwise be against, they would sign a discharge petition. It was held in a locked drawer in the speaker's desk. When you have to sign a discharge petition, you can only look at the page where it was, and then you sign that discharge petition. When they get up to X number, and actually it took a majority, which would have been, a majority of the 435, then it was automatically discharged and came to the floor. But then they would go home and deny that they signed the discharge petition. So what I did was I worked it out with the Wall Street Journal. The punishment for doing what I was doing was I would be discharged from the House. That didn't bother me a bit because I'd create a vacancy and that I'd run for re-election. It'd be a landslide.
They were going to remove you from the House?
Oh, yeah.
How?
Well, there's a rule, a House rule, that if you disclose the name of someone who did or did not sign a discharge petition, and what I did is by going up there, it's funny you'd ask this question because the four of the big four, one of them is Buck McKeon, who is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee today. Well, he reminded me, remember he said, I sat next to you on the floor, and then we'd go up, and you'd give me the names of the ones who signed, and I'd have somebody else go sign it. He'd memorize as many as he could on that page, and I'd write the names down. Then when we got up, we gave those names to the Wall Street Journal. They published those names. That happened during the August recess. That became so popular that we were opening up government, and one man was doing it, and that was me, where I was getting all the credit for it. When we went back in session, all of these Democrats who had opposed me all along were lining up begging me because they had to cut it off at 218. They said, I want to be one of the 218 that signs this because they're all lined up to do it. I can name some of them that would probably surprise you.
But is it true only twice it has been used successfully on major legislation in recent history?
Well, the funny thing about it is they kind of joke around. That was done at a time when the Democrats always controlled everything. Then Republicans with Newt Gingrich came into control. So it was used not against them. It's still good government. You should not have any kind of a secret way of passing a bill without the public knowing it. So it didn't bother me a bit when Newt had to pay the price for not being able to hide, some of the votes that he would have used it.
Did it ever occur to you that maybe I'm going too far here or they're threatening me and I need to shut down? You're showing your maverick side there, which you've shown steadily, I think, in your role as a representative in Senate. Or were you so certain about yourself that I don't care what happens to me?
Well, no, because I really didn't care. I was getting a little tired of that anyway. This is toward the end of 8 years of being in that House.
In 1994, Senator David Bourne is a Democrat. He announces he's going to resign and he's going to become the president of Oklahoma University. Mm-hmm. So you were elected to fill that Senate seat.
That's correct.
This was a nationally historic election that saw the Republican Party take both houses of Congress and our Oklahoma governorship, too. Mm-hmm. Second time in state history.
But keep in mind, I was a month ahead of those guys because it was a special election. So that's why when I got to the United States Senate, I had seniority over everybody who was elected that particular year because I was sworn in a month before they were.
You took office November 17th, your 60th birthday, and that gave you that seniority.
And I was sworn in instead of being sworn in on January 1st.
So did that help you then from get-go, from time?
Oh, yeah. I had
seniority immediately.
Not big seniority. I can't remember the total number. It was a big class that was elected, though. It might have been, 18 or so.
Yeah.
So I was not number 99.
Right. In that campaign, you campaigned using your plane, and you visited almost every town in Oklahoma.
That's where I spent a lot of time in southern Oklahoma. What is referred to as Little Dixie, even though that's not an endearing characterization down south.
In your congressional and Senate debates, you've been very influential involving aircraft regulation, including the Pilot's Bill of Rights. Talk to us about that.
Okay. Any bureaucracy going unchecked is a problem. We all know about the EPA and what they're doing with their regulations, just killing business in America under the Obama EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. But it's the same thing with others. They're just better known. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they've grown to be a giant organization, just as an example. when they were talking about having to go through sequestration and make some cuts of about 2%, they're hysterical. How can we do this? And yet, their total budget to run their department, to run all the FAA back in 1996 was $1.6 billion. I'll double check these figures. I think I'm going to be right, though. Today, it's almost double that. And yet their workload is less because there are fewer pilots today. They had become an overwhelming, overbearing bureaucracy. And my phone would ring off the hook because I was the only licensed pilot, certainly in the Oklahoma delegation, but I was the one who was willing to get into these issues. So people who were abused by doing ground checks or any other thing where someone who has the power of the bureaucracy puts someone out of business, takes away their license without just cause, these things were going on. So I was helping other pilots, since I understand the issues better than others do, in getting these things done. And then it happened to me in Cameron County Airport in the southern tip of Texas, where I've been a developer for many years. I'd landed my airplanes on that more than 200 times. I knew every square foot of that. It gets a little bit technical here, but when you are doing work on a runway, you have to have it published. They're called NOTAMs, Notice to Airmen, NOTAMS. NOTAMs, by law, are supposed to be published. But it doesn't say specifically where, so that they can always not do it and then claim that they were published someplace. Anyway, there are no NOTAMs on this, and I went into Valley Approach. The approach control, that's FAA, cleared me to land on runway 13 at Cameron County Airport. I was in a big twin-engine plane, and the guy sitting next to me had never been in a small plane before. I dirtied up the plane, getting ready to land, when I saw him working on the first third of the runway. It was a 9,000-foot runway, so you got lots of room. But it's the point where I would not be able to do a clean-up and go-around because you get down to when you're almost landed, you can't do it. So I landed over the edge and coasted. Everything was fine. I didn't think there was a problem. There was someone down there who really didn't like me. That day, they called the New York Times and the Washington Post, dreamed up this story that I almost killed people landing. I went back and I went to the FAA and they said, well, you are guilty of doing this and this and this. And I said, wait a minute. You're accusing me. I've not even heard the evidence used against me. You're not entitled to the evidence we have against you. I went through this thing where actually they made me take a remedial training, which is one trip with a flight instructor, and I used a guy who I was his flight instructor. Just for my own ego, I didn't really need to do that. Then I got to thinking, they could have taken away my license if that was my livelihood. They've done this. We have countless records of people who they've taken away their way of making a living. So I put together the Pilot's Bill of Rights, and we took on the bureaucracy. And immediately, well, it's like the EPA. Anytime you try to pass something to clean up their act, they immediately jumped all over. They went to a well-known name here would be J. Rockefeller. J. Rockefeller was the chairman of the Commerce Committee that has jurisdiction over the FAA. And they said, don't let this bill get out of your committee. We can't have it. There's the safety concerns, and besides that, they were God. They were the bureaucracy. So for a year, I tried to get a hearing, and I couldn't do it. So I went to Harry Reid. He and I have an unusual relationship. I said, Harry, I've got a bill. I have 67 Senate co-sponsors to my Pilot's Bill of Rights, and I can't get a hearing. He said, that's just not fair. So he and I went down to the floor, and we did what they call a Rule 14, when it bypasses committees. It's very rarely used. I can't even think of when else it's been used. And because Harry was willing to help me do that, it sailed through. Obviously, all the co-sponsors voted for it, and it would pass the House in 1 hour after that because they were all ready for it. That happened before Oshkosh, a matter of a week before Oshkosh, the biggest thing for general aviation. That was the Pilot's Bill of Rights. And it did a number of things. First of all, it says if you're accused of something, you have access to the evidence that's going to be used against you. They say that NOTAMs had to be published in an area that is identifiable, and we have the words down so where you know if there is no NOTAM that's published, we can go and show that there is none. The third big issue, and this is a major issue that didn't affect me, but it did others, it might now, on medical certification. It was unequal all over the country. I know people who have had open heart surgery like I had who are flying 6 months later and everything's fine. And I know some that 5 years later still aren't. Well, now they're changing all that. So this bill was truly a Bill of Rights, and it's a major piece. People say, well, Inhofe, that's self-serving, you're doing all that. It didn't affect me because that wasn't in effect when.
Mm-hmm. We should point out Harry Reid, the majority leader of the Democrat Senate, was your friend then and still is. That's interesting that the two of you can work together.
Yes, we've become good friends. For one thing, we were both married the same year. His wife went through a thing with cancer. He and I have become close. People don't understand that you can have someone who can be a political enemy that can be a very close personal friend. That's what we are. He'd say the same thing. Mm-hmm. In fact, he did. If you remember, on the floor of the House, it was when my son died that he gave a talk on the floor talking about my son and me. It was a very emotional thing.
And I want to come to that in a moment here. But you're the ranking member now of the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee?
That's correct. People who are going through this, they need to understand. If you're a majority party, such as the Democrats are in the Senate, if you are the ranking Democrat, you're the chairman. If you're the ranking Republican, you're the ranking member. Now go across the aisle to the Republicans who are the majority, just the opposite of the Senate, over in the House. Yeah. So the Republicans would be the chairman. Democrats would be the ranking member.
A former chairman and ranking member of the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, as a matter of fact. You became the only member of Congress to fly an airplane around the world when you recreated Wiley Post's legendary trip around the globe. How long did that trip take you?
Well, a lot longer than it should. It took 17 days, but 4 of those days were in eastern Siberia, where we were not incarcerated, but forced to stay in a type of a hotel because they didn't think that we owned the plane. I had 3 good friends with me. All 3 were pilots, but they weren't twin-engine rated, and this is a twin-engine airplane. So I had to be seated in one of the front seats during the trip around the world.
Were there any...
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you 2 kind of Jesus-related things. I'm not embarrassed about being a follower of Jesus. I remember going across Siberia. Siberia is unbelievable. I can't even tell you right now how many time zones you go through, and you don't see anything. You don't see any roads. You see nothing but some winding rivers and just wooded areas and bears and mosquitoes. That's it. Hour after hour after hour. I started having trouble with my left engine about halfway across Siberia. I had a GPS. I pressed for the nearest airport, and it was over 600 nautical miles away. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you're over gross weight in a twin-engine plane, it won't fly on one engine. You lose an engine, you might as well be in a single-engine airplane. It just goes down. The other time, there's an Inhofe. All Inhofes spelled this way, I-N-H-O-F-E, are related. And when we came from Germany, they went to 3 places, Iowa, Minnesota, and Alaska. There's a John Inhofe in Alaska who is a wood carver. He was from a place, and we were recreating the trip of Wiley Post. He didn't go there, but I talked to this guy on the phone. I wanted to meet him. So I deviated from the route that Wiley Post took, going across the Bering Strait to going down toward Canada. And I went up the glacier. It's the largest glacier. I can't remember what it's called. Now, a glacier, by its nature, down at the bottom, it's several miles wide. But as you go up, then it gets to about a half mile wide up at the top. Well, I was watching because the glacier is going up at the same rate of climb that I had. So we're just barely able to stay above this thing and went into a cloud bank. So I couldn't see that side or that side. But I had the GPS and I locked it in. I said, Lord, if you have more for me to do, you get me out the top. Came right out. So we had a few close calls.
About the Senate, just a review that you were reelected then in 2002 and 2008, and you're getting ready to run again now in 2014. You'd be 86 years old serving out that term.
Mm-hmm.
The conservative publication Human Events ranked you number 1 in the top 10 most outstanding conservative senators. An unabashed conservative, they said. And the National Journal magazine ranked you the most conservative member of the Senate and noted that you were the only senator with a perfect conservative score. How does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel good, but I believe, and it's something that a lot of people who are running as conservatives, they just want to make sure they don't vote for anything that has money in it. Well, that's what we're supposed to be doing in Washington. So I've often said that I may be ranked as the most conservative, but there are 2 areas where I think we need to be actually spending more money on than we do: national defense and infrastructure. And if you read the Constitution, those are the 2 things we're supposed to be doing here. It's all Article 1, Section 8, I believe it is. And so we had a lot of the people that were in the Senate when I had this last bill, which was the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, that builds roads and highways in Oklahoma and throughout the nation. And it was one where the conservative position was to vote for it for this reason. If you voted against it, you have to go on extensions. That is, you're not operating on a 3-year bill or a 12-month bill or something like that. You're going from month to month. If you do that, Gary Ridley, the head of transportation for Oklahoma, will tell you that you waste about 30% off the top. So clearly that's money that could be used to build. And so I used that on the floor. The American Conservative Union praised me for doing this, and they said I was doing the constitutional thing. A lot of the less legitimate conservative groups were not. So we had, without mentioning names, several Republican senators who had never been really conservative using this as their ticket to try to look conservative. I knew I had the vote, so I didn't say anything there. I went over to the House. There are 33 Republicans on the T&I Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure. I asked for all the Republicans, all 33 Republicans, to come in one room and let me talk to them. In there are several Tea Party people. I explained to them what I just explained, the conservative position, and then I showed them constitutionally why we're supposed to be doing what we're doing. And as a result of that, every one of the 33 voted for it in the House. So we're making headway. And I only bring this up because I probably received more rankings as the most conservative member as maybe any other member has. But I also realize that we need roads, highways, and defending America. And so that's what I do. That's why when I was first elected to the Senate, I got on the Senate Armed Services Committee and Environment and Public Works, because that covers all the infrastructure and the defense.
So your view then of what we know as the Tea Party today, what is your comment on that party?
I think that it's been a wake-up call for a lot of the Republicans who have caused us to lose races. And I know this is controversial and most people disagree with this. But I believe that the confusion of people not knowing the difference between a Republican and a Democrat caused us to lose some races that we shouldn't have lost. I'm talking about U.S. Senate races and House races, but I'm more familiar with the U.S. Senate races. And so I think what they did is they forced a lot of the Republicans to start acting like Republicans, and we've shown that we're able to win some of these races. Now, the other extreme, you can, as a result of that, get a candidate who can't win in a general election. And we had 2 of those last time that we would have won as Republicans that we didn't win because our candidate was not well-versed. He was not a well-versed conservative. He was more, I'm conservative, period.
You said you met your wife, Kay, way back when, and now you've been married for how many years?
We are having this month our 54th wedding anniversary.
Children from that marriage?
4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, 12 grandchildren.
Which does bring me to the recent loss of your son, Perry, in a plane crash, November 10th, 2013, on a Sunday, and the crash happened near Owasso. If you want to comment on that.
Yeah, Perry's an excellent, I wish that you would take the time to review the funeral, Perry's funeral. I spoke during that, and everyone realized that Perry was an unusual person. Generally, people strive for perfection. Perry reached perfection in everything he did. When he graduated, and I've used this during my remarks, from his first university, they went to Duke University, we thought he was just going for 1 degree. I lived with my whole family in that 421, and off we went to Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. And we were at electrical and engineering school. The number 1, broad print, Perry Des Moines II. And that's great, Perry. We're so proud of you. Well, we're going to go now. Well, we have another graduation, and that was the biomedical engineering. Still, number 1. Everything he did, he wasn't happy unless he was the number 1. Everybody knows that who knew him in high school and all that. Just really an outstanding young guy.
And an outstanding orthopedic surgeon here.
Well, he
Tulsa.
was so good that when I go around the state, I don't care where it is. It can be in Hugo, Oklahoma. If there are more than 15 people in the room, they'll say, "Oh, you're Dr. Inhofe's father." Not he's a senator's son. I'm his father. And then they want to show me their hand where he did surgery. I don't know how he did as many as he did, but he actually achieved Outstanding Orthopedic Surgeon of the Year. He's the very best in everything that he did. He was the best pilot. I was his instructor. The guy flew by the numbers. I can't comment on how this accident happened because we don't know yet.
He was flying a Mitsubishi MU-2B-25.
That's correct.
Which I guess had some history of problems.
It has a history of problems. They've had a total of, I understand, 704 units, of which 340 some have been killed. That kind of tells you something.
Yeah. You passed on the love of flying to him and to his son.
Yeah, Jimmy, my older son, and Perry, the younger son, who was killed in the accident. Both were with me. Perry, I can remember, he ended up being tall and strong and all that. He started out being real short. I remember when he was probably 6 or 7 years old. I was in an instrument flight, and I was having engine problems, and Perry was seated next to me, and it was 0-0 out there going from San Antonio to Brownsville, Texas. I said, Perry, try to keep us going straight and level here. I've got to get underneath there to see if I can't fix this electrical problem. So I did, and probably 2 or 3 minutes, I came back, and he was right on target. Perry had learned to fly. He never could see visually out because he's too short. So he learned to fly on instruments. So he was an exceptionally good pilot. The big event every year is Oshkosh. Both boys, we went, the three of us, 34 consecutive years. Our last year was the 34th consecutive year to Oshkosh.
That's an air show.
It's an air show. We'd fly in it sometimes. We'd always take different airplanes up there, experimental airplanes. That's the one event where it wouldn't matter what else any of us were doing, we would be at Oshkosh.
And you did that.
And we did this, and this year when Perry went up, he took his younger son, Cole. He soloed him as his instructor on the way to Oshkosh in a little Grumman Tiger. And it was the same plane that I soloed his father, Perry, 34 years before.
That's a great legacy, isn't it? Your faith has sustained you and Kay and the family then through this. There are others who may have lost children. We don't expect to lose our children.
It's not supposed to happen that way. I ended up my talk at his funeral showing Perry all the time since he was in high school how he loved the Lord. And I said, so this isn't goodbye. This is so long, see you soon. Mm-hmm. That's what we're here about, how it all happened.
Yeah. Let me also mention here, because this has been an interesting time for you, in early October, you went in on a routine doctor visit, and bingo, they say you've got a serious problem.
Yeah, this is what happened. Your cardiologist will tell you that if you're a candidate for a heart attack, that there are 4 symptoms. One, swollen legs, dizziness, and all this stuff. I never had any symptoms. In fact, just a month before this happened, I was in Colorado with 2 of my granddaughters, actually going up the mountain, starting at 10,000 feet and going all the way up and competing with kids. So I never had any problems, but every 5 or 7 years you want to have a colonoscopy. So I had no reason to go other than I had time to do it, and I went in to have a colonoscopy. And they said, well, there's a way you can do it. If you have a virtual, then you don't have to waste a day of your life. If you have a normal one, it's a general anesthetic. You've probably gone through it. Mm-hmm. So you lose a whole day. But if you do a virtual, then all they'll do is give you a shot. Then they fill you full of water, and then they run you through the tube, and they x-ray it. So they see things beyond your gut, beyond your colon, where otherwise they would not have seen. Oh. When we came out, he said, your colon's fine, but you're about to die. 2 arteries were 100% blocked. And this is the doctor's report. It shows it. 2 that were 90%, and then the others 70 to 75. So we had to have a quadruple to take care of those. He needed to do it right then. I said, well, since my wife had gone through this a year before, and since all my kids and grandkids were back in Oklahoma, I said, let me call Dr. Garrett, who had done my wife. And if he can take me tomorrow morning, I'll take the plane back tonight and just get off of the plane and hit the table and do it. And that's what happened. And you know who is to credit for, I believe, saving my life was Tom Stafford. Tom Stafford is a well-known Oklahoma early astronaut. Mm-hmm. He is a very close friend of mine. And when he was talking to someone on my staff, he just commented to Tom, said, oh, the boss isn't going to be here tomorrow because he's doing a colonoscopy. He said, no, tell him to do a virtual colonoscopy, and then he'll be able to be here. So it was Tom Stafford who, according to the doctors, and I don't want to sound hysterical here, but he saved my life. He said, you couldn't have lasted a matter of just a few more days, and I didn't have any of the symptoms. There's one doctor up there, he said, we think you've made medical history because you had no symptoms and yet you had all that blockage in there. Only this morning, I went back and I'm great.
You had an exam this morning?
Yeah.
And they said everything's fine?
This is the first time I've gone back to have that particular post-op exam. This is only not even a couple months ago.
You said you flew back? Were you flying?
No. I didn't have a plane up there commercially. Yeah.
That had to make you nervous the time you were flying back?
Well, no, I wanted to do it because I thought the way they described it, I might not have made it or it might have been a more difficult operation. I wanted to be where all of my kids were. In St. John's Hospital, my wife was born there. All of my kids were born there. We know everybody there, and that's where we wanted to do it. So I thought I'd take the risk of making it back here. I didn't want to be stuck up there for maybe 2 weeks, forcing them to go up. Now, as it turned out, I was out of there. In fact, I was mowing my field up at the lake 4 days after I had the surgery.
Wow.
They didn't know it, but I was.
But you said Kay had bypass surgery as well?
She had. And this is the interesting thing that I think fits into what we're talking about here. Right now, what's the big issue? It's Obamacare. Mm-hmm. Ted Cruz did his thing. It technically was not a filibuster, but he was up all night long. And I wasn't willing to do that, but I spoke that night and the next morning. What I talked about the next morning was my wife, and I know she was a little upset with me because she hadn't told a lot of people back in Oklahoma that she had had open heart surgery. Hers was in a valve, aorta. My wife, who's just a year younger than I am, if we'd been living, keeping in mind that what they want is a single-payer system. Obama, Harry Reid, they've all admitted that. They want a single payer. That's socialized medicine. That's just like Hillary Healthcare was in 1992. If we had had any of those systems, and we checked, in Canada, she would have had a 6-month waiting period. In the UK, it would have been a 2-month waiting period because that's what they do. They say if you're over a certain age, you can't have this type of surgery. And one of the reasons they do it, they know you're going to die anyway. And so she is alive and healthy today, I said on the floor of the Senate, because we didn't have Obamacare. Not knowing that just a matter of 2 weeks after that, I was going to have open heart surgery.
Wow. Well, you've had several brushes with death. You were flying and got shot at in Iraq when, I believe, 4 U.S. lawmakers were on that plane.
Yeah, it was an old C-1, the early
C-130 came under fire from 3 rocket-propelled grenades as you left for Jordan.
At that time, it was in Iraq, and we're taking off from the Capitol. And one of the guys with me, he's retired from the Senate now, but he was from Florida.
Senator Mel Martinez?
Mel Martinez, yeah. I was sitting up in the driver's seat. I'd like to do that with the pilots and listen to them, talk about the problems they're having, what kind of equipment they've got, what their needs are, because I'm the ranking member, and we were trying to wind down those early H-model C-130s, and I was building my case when all of a sudden it hit. There was a flash, and they sent out the flares, because these are heat-directed surface-to-air missiles. The first one hit, and then after that, the flares went out, and that drew them away from the airplane. And that was kind of exciting. And I went downstairs, and when you get on the plane, you always take all of your body armor off because you don't want to be riding on the plane with that. I looked over, and Mel Martinez still had his body armor. I said, Mel, what are you doing? He said, well, I promised Kitty, that's his wife, if I went, I would never take my body armor off during that time. And if something had happened and we'd been killed, the words he used, she would kill me. So anyway, that was an exciting trip.
That whole ordeal kind of jostled the plane around, did it?
Oh, yeah.
So coming under fire and surviving.
Remember when my prop came off?
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Because that was earlier, and I'd forgotten about that when you said surviving. When the prop came off, it was the last year of Clinton. And that was right after the first Moore tornado. It was actually the second one, but the one before this one. The town was really damaged. So the president was coming in to Tinker Air Force Base, which part of the tornado hit that too. People were speculating that Inhofe would be the only member of the delegation who won't show up down there because he didn't like the president. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Well, I happened to be at our place up at the lake. We had a little grass strip up there. It had been raining the day before. So instead of taking the little plane, I took the kids' plane. And I was flying just to the other side of Claremore when this huge vibration took place. I did a mag check and found out it wasn't that, and then I realized it had to be the prop that was broken off in the tip. The good news is when you feather your prop then, you can coast a lot further. And I was only at 3,000 feet, I think. And I was able to coast back to the airport at Claremore. What I didn't know was this was a fixed-gear airplane. When the prop came off, it also took the landing gear, the nose gear off. And I didn't know that until I landed. I said, that's pretty good landing. I dropped down and wait a minute, I was upside down. Well, anyway, there happened to be an AP guy there, and we still to this day don't know why he happened to be there. And he was taking pictures. I knocked Bill Clinton off the front page of every newspaper in Oklahoma. And I didn't have to go down to Tinker. But I was answering the phone because all these calls were coming in. One guy called up and said, is this Claremore Airport? I said, yeah. He said, did somebody up there lose a propeller? I said, yeah. Well, it darn near killed me. And I said, well, put it in your truck and bring it up here. This guy drove up. He looked at me and he said, well, Jim Inhofe. And I looked at him and I said, G.W. Curtis. I had not seen him since we graduated from Central High School together. I came within a yard of killing him with 300 pounds of my engine and prop landing right next to him.
Wow. What goes through your mind when you're losing a prop?
Well, it's a consistent thing that we do because for some reason I have this thing where I say, all right, Lord, if you got more for me to do, and then it's not my problem. It's his.
You have prayed that many times, haven't you? If you have. So apparently he has more for you to do since you're running for re-election, as a matter of fact. I'm just going to throw some issues at you that you've been on record for. First of all, you're a longtime supporter of our 5 military installations. You've defended the use of congressional earmarks. What is an earmark?
The most misunderstood thing is an earmark, by definition, is anything that you vote for that is specific, but it has some benefit to your state or your district if it's a House member. Now, if you read the Constitution, there's a reason that was set up, and it says, and I'm paraphrasing now, but anyone who is listening to us, go look it up and they'll find that in the Constitution, it says this is what we are supposed to be doing. They specifically said this should not be done by the president, and when they're talking about the balance of power. You go back and read any of the justices back in the early 1800s, and they said that we should not ever take this away from Congress, because when you deny something that is thought of as an earmark today, that is something that then goes back and the bureaucracy does it. That's the president. The president does it. It doesn't save one nickel. And yet, for example, things that would have been good for Tinker Air Force Base, they'll deny that, and that'll go to Fort Drum in New York or someplace where politically the president does better. Now, everybody knows this, but quite frankly, the Republican conservatives are not courageous enough to admit it, that you're really doing a great disservice if you don't take your constitutional responsibility, and that is to do these things. The Founding Fathers said back in the formative years, we are better informed about what the needs are around the country than the president is. So what I've done is I've come up with a solution. I said, define an earmark as an appropriation that has not been authorized, and I'll vote against every earmark that's out there, because that's what we're supposed to do. Authorize, and we have authorization committees, and then we have appropriation committees. That way it has to pass judgment. And if there's any self-serving on there, it won't pass. I mean, it just doesn't happen. But it's all based on need in those committees. So I introduced that, and one of the guys, quite frankly, has been exploiting that issue for years, was John McCain, and some others whose names I won't mention. But I went to John and I said, John, why don't we just kill this issue by defining an earmark? And he agreed to do it. He co-sponsored it with me and later withdrew. Everyone, I can't think of one person who didn't agree that that was the answer. But the problem is, how do you explain it to the public? As a result of it, we have a lot of things that have come, and I have. Now, listen, this is very significant. I'm not doing this to try to sell my book. But in The Greatest Hoax, the book that I wrote, I have one whole chapter on earmarks. If you read that chapter, I even listed the 102 most egregious earmarks according to Sean Hannity. And I did this on the Senate floor. I read all 102 of them. When I was through it, I said, what do all these 102 earmarks have in common? Not one is a congressional earmark. They're all presidential earmarks. I'm talking about the turtle trails and all these things that people find so offensive. The president did them all. The public never understood that. But it's all documented in my book.
You've sponsored or co-sponsored, is this right, 95 earmarks?
Well, it depends how you define an earmark. I don't know that. I don't know what the source of that is, because there's no definition of an earmark. And thus it's something, yes, almost everything that happens in the military, I'm a part of. I'm a co-sponsor of almost every bill. Of course, a lot of those are in Oklahoma. We do some things in Oklahoma that other states don't do. We're 5 major military installations. We have gone through 5 BRAC rounds. That's Base Realignment and Closure Commission. They're set up to cut down the number of bases and military installations in accordance with their performance. We're the only state that all 5 of ours, with all 5 BRAC rounds, have increased in numbers and admissions, employees and admissions, because we do it better here. Yeah, I'm not embarrassed about that at all.
Was it in 2010 the House Republicans put a 1-year moratorium on earmarks?
Dumbest thing the Republicans could have done, and I said that to them. And if you talk to one of the more responsible House members, Congressman Tom Cole from Norman and Moore, he will tell you that he led the fight to try to stop them from doing that because it's so irresponsible. He'll tell you that if you call him up and ask him. And it took a lot of courage. In fact, they said, you're right on this, Inhofe, but you'll never be able to explain it. Frank Luntz, who is probably the best known real political mechanic in the country, said, Inhofe, you are dead right on this, but you'll never sell that to public. And Fred Davis, the same thing. And I said, I don't really care because I know I'm right on this thing, and you know I'm right too. And so,
you talk about conservatives get upset with you. You're a conservative. So do some conservatives look upon you as a liberal conservative? You have this argument, seems.
You have a lot of fairly recent conservative groups that have come along with this conservative movement. Club for Growth is one of them. But they score a lot of things that I don't think are conservative versus liberal issues. The most legitimate of all of them is the American Conservative Union. It's the oldest group, and it's the one that looks and is not afraid, such as on the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, saying the conservative position is to vote for it, even though the public didn't understand that. So they all like me, and I'm ranked pretty well with them, but now and then when these issues come up, I'm not embarrassed. Right now, we're trying to undo some of the damage that's been done to our military by the Obama administration, and a lot of them don't agree with that. Okay. In fact, a lot of the libertarians that are among that group, and certainly one would be Rand Paul, good guy, good friend, but like a lot of libertarians, they don't really think that we have a greater need for more military strength. It's just an honest disagreement.
So then name some that are more tuned to your line of thinking as a conservative, others that are in Congress.
Jeff Sessions from Alabama would be one. John Cornyn from Texas. Even though he has someone running against him now and trying to make him look like a liberal, it's not going to work. If you're going to use them, I'd like to give you a whole list because there are a lot of them that are. John Bozeman, for example, from Arkansas. These are people who, they'll look at the issue and they'll overlook what the public perception of that is. And most of those public perceptions have been generated by groups that have a dog in the fight.
Climate change. You repeat the claim that human-influenced climate change is a hoax and impossible. You're probably known nationally because of your stance on this, and you oppose scientists and all.
It all started back in the Kyoto Treaty. That was back during Clinton-Gore, and Gore went down to South America. They all got together with the United Nations. It's all driven by the United Nations, that we're having global warming and everyone's going to die. Everyone believed it at that time. So they started introducing bills. The first bill was the McCain-Lieberman bill. Well, McCain's a Republican, so it was not just all Democrats. Some of those involved with the professors at the Wharton School had a separate little group that said, if you pass cap and trade, it's going to be the largest tax increase in the history of America. It's going to be between $300 and $400 billion every year. Now, that translates in Oklahoma as just under $3,000 a family. And I thought, I want to make sure that the science is right on this. So I started and got the word out there that scientists who were not afraid to do so let me know. And they started calling in saying, no, there's nothing to it. And I can debate this with anyone and show that global warming is not taking place and we're not going to be passing it. No one will debate me on it anymore. The only reason they're using climate change is because we won the battle on global warming, so they're now renaming it. The United Nations I have a whole chapter in my book on this. It's the longest chapter in the book, and we've done a lot of research, and it goes all the way back to several decades ago. The United Nations is very offended that they have to be accountable to the United States or any other country. They want to be completely self-supporting. There is a liberal view that agrees with this. So how are we going to do it? Well, if we can come up and do it through global warming, we can be the group that sponsors that. So the whole thing started down in Buenos Aires when they passed the Kyoto thing. Then the United Nations sponsored the biggest party of the year in December of every year. And that was to get all the countries to come in, and any of them who would go along with the global warming thing, they had the biggest party of the year. I mean, caviar and everything else in the most attractive places in the world. One of the more recent ones, they had all gone over to Copenhagen. John Kerry, he was a senator at that time. Hillary Clinton, she was a senator at that time. Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Boxer, Obama, all of them had gone over and lied to them and said, we in the United States are going to pass cap and trade. And I went over, after they came back, I went over on the last day, the big climax of the thing, to announce that they were lying to them, deliberately. These top leaders in America were deliberately lying. 191 countries were represented. All 191 had one thing in common. They all hated me. But I told them the truth. There's no way in the world that they can get over 35 votes in the 100-member Senate to this, and it's true. So then Obama was trying to do through regulation what he could not do through legislation. Both John Barrasso and Roger Wicker, that's Wyoming and Mississippi, are on my side on all these issues. So it's been a long thing, and there's still some people upset with me on that. But it was a lonely fight the first 6 years. I mean, threats and the whole works.
Threats? What do you mean?
Oh, people are saying, you're destroying America. You're going to die for this.
How do your colleagues treat you on this issue? You mentioned John Kerry and others, Hillary Clinton.
Well, there'll be some like them who really believe it. Hillary Clinton. Another one is Ed Markey. Ed Markey came over from the House. He was elected to the Senate this last time. He is the one that I debated more than anybody else. But he actually believes it. And he, by the way, is a real close friend of mine. When I had my heart surgery, he's the first one to call up and say that his dad had the same thing and told me the positive results that he got and all that. But then there are others, the Republicans, who are still on the side of climate change and global warming because they know that's the popular side to be on. But every one of them knows better. Every one of them. And they'll admit to me that they do. I'm more of a maverick than I thought I was.
Well, you don't mind being alone. It doesn't seem to bother you any. Or does it?
It doesn't. No. If the cause is one where I know I'm right, just imagine passing a tax increase when they admit it would not do anything. I mean, they all know that CO2 is not responsible for any appreciable amount of change in the weather. They know that now, and they didn't know it back during Kyoto. Now they're trying to do a new Kyoto, and their parties are still going on. They're still going over there and trying to get America to do this, but we're not going to.
You're not going to give up that fight, because you could easily walk away from it.
Oh, no, not that one.
So here you have these scientists. The Union of Concerned Scientists stated that your statement was in error. So you have all these scientists.
Yeah, but they have a position to take where they benefit. Let's take all of these various foundations that support all the scientists. They're the ones who dictate it, and they get it, of course, from the United Nations, that if you don't agree with this, the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the United Nations. They formed that to bring all the scientists in to perpetuate the fraud of global warming. And they were successful in doing it. It was brilliant the way they pulled it off. It would have been a reality.
So then, to kind of recap that, do you believe in any global warming?
No, not as most people understand. There's always going to be change in climate. We can go through, and I have it all plotted out in graphs, and I've done this on the Senate floor. I've done it in debates, and I've shown them when it was hotter than it is now, and that we've gone through the little ice age and the medieval warming period, and this has been going on throughout recorded history of hotter times and of colder times than we have. The interesting thing now, we're actually going into a cooling period. Let me just be specific so that anyone who's listening to this one, if you start with 1895, at that time, it was a cooling period. An ice age was coming. We're all going to freeze to death. Then, in about 1918, we came out of that ice age thing, It went into a warming period that went up until the middle 40s. In 1945, they started into another ice age that lasted through the middle of the 70s. Here's the interesting thing, and no one disagrees with this. In 1945, at the end of the war, was the largest release of CO2 worldwide in the recorded history of the world. And it precipitated not a warming period, but a 30-year cooling period that sustained all the way up through the end of the 70s. We went into another warming. Now we're going into another cooling period.
Quickly, undocumented immigrants today, here we are in 2013, we're wondering what should take place and how should they become part of our society. They already are, they're here, they're going to stay. What do we do about
my
them?
position is formulated because of two things. One is I've been privileged, I think, now I can't document this, but at one time I think I was asked to speak to the naturalization ceremonies, some in Oklahoma City, some in Tulsa, more than any other members have, because I have this passion. Maybe it's because of our family, but the people that come over and do it the right way, they become better citizens. I can point out people from Mexico who've gone through this naturalization process, know more about the history of America than John Erling and Jim Inhofe put together. And these people did it the hard way. They learned the language and did it the way it should be done. So I have always opposed a way of shortcutting that so that we are slapping them in the face, because I think that's a process that we need in this country. Now, on the other side of it, let's go to southwest Oklahoma in the cotton country down there. They can't bring in a crop without the people that they... So there's a way of documenting workers totally different than becoming a citizen. It should not be a road to citizenship. They're still willing to come up as documented workers. You go out the Panhandle now, where we have hog country and all the things that are going on out there right now. There's a lot of undocumented workers, but they can police that up so that they have to be documented, and that shouldn't be that difficult to do.
Real quick here, give us a civics lesson. You have come up with a bill, and you want to sponsor a bill. How does that make its way through?
I'll give you the normal way it happens. We have a bicameral legislature in Washington. You have the House and the Senate. And there's a reason for that. And you go back and study the Constitution. You think it had to be divinely inspired the way it has worked out. But we have both the House and the Senate. People generally know the difference between the House and the Senate. So for legislation to pass and become the law, you've got to go through the process of both the House and the Senate. So a bill can be introduced in the Senate, and at the same time, one identical be introduced in the House. They can both pass, one the Senate, one the House, and it can become law if they're exactly the same. They never are. So they go to a conference. The House and the Senate get together in a room, and they say, all right, we both passed a bill. It can be a highway bill to build highways, but it's different because they're putting money in different areas, one's stronger on bridges and so forth. So they go into a conference, and the conference committees are made up of the leadership in that particular interest area, like transportation or in defense, if that's the case. They get in one room and they iron out all the differences, and it's sent back then to the House and then to the Senate, and it can't be amended at that point. So they have to vote for it or against it. And then in most cases, by the time it goes through that process, they reluctantly vote for it, or they're still mad that their thing didn't get in. Now, that's normally what happens. But this is very interesting that you'd ask this question, because I spent all day yesterday. That would have been on December 2nd, yesterday. On December 2nd, I left here at 6 a.m. in the morning, left Oklahoma, went to Washington, and I got back around midnight last night. That all happened on the 2nd. The reason I went is because the House passed a defense authorization bill called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. The House has to pass one in the Senate, and then it goes into conference. But the Senate refused to pass one. Now, if we go into January and we haven't passed one, we can't pay our kids that are out there risking their lives. We can't move equipment around. It's absolutely imperative that we pass one. Well, they wouldn't pass it. There are several people who didn't want it unless they could have their amendment on something that has nothing to do with defending America. It might be on minimum wage or something like that. So they have the Big Four. The Big Four are in the Senate, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then the ranking member, that's me, and then on the House, the chairman of the House Committee and the ranking member there. So we had four of us coming in doing the job that 535 people would normally be doing, but we were not able to do it. So we, throughout the day yesterday, went through every contentious issue and made hard decisions. And I can't tell you, I will not tell you what they are now, because I was waiting for this call, and Mitch McConnell doesn't even know this. He's supposed to be calling me back. But we'll go back, and what I think will happen is that the House will take a bill that originated in the House, went to the Senate, and was changed, and it's going back to the House. I don't know what bill that will be. And they'll put this on as an amendment and pass it, and then it comes over. It may be amendable, but in this case, Harry Reid will be criticized for it. But he will put it in a position where there can't be amendments. He'll fill the tree, it's called, with amendments, so there's no room for any other amendments. There's a saying that there's nothing more repulsive to see made than sausage or laws. Mm-hmm. This is a good example of that. And why should four people, in fact, one didn't even show up, so there's three of us did it, be able to do something? And I anticipate that that will become the law for this year's National Defense Authorization Act. And that will cause us to start paying attention and doing what we should have done months ago in passing one the right way. I only use that because there's the ideal picture of how things are supposed to work, but if they don't work, there are other things that can be done. This is a good example of that, which happened on December 2nd of 2013.
From October 1st through October 16th of this year, our federal government entered a shutdown and pretty much curtailed most routine operations after Congress failed to enact legislation. So this funding gap was created when the two chambers of commerce failed to agree to an appropriations continuing resolution, and this was to defund the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It was led by conservative senators such as Ted Cruz. Mm-hmm. Did you think that was the proper way to try to attack the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think it's something that forces people to take a position on something that's controversial. However, I'd have to tell you that that isn't really the reason that this happened. Every year, as we all know, and everyone who is listening to us now knows, that the reason that we're in such heavy debt in this country is that we always will get right up to the end of a fiscal year and say we have to increase the debt or we have to renege on our obligations. I said, I think it was 6 years ago, that someday we're going to have to stop this. We're going to have to say, fine, if it means that we're going to have to not pay our obligations as a nation, if that's what it takes to get beyond this point where we live within our means, then we should be doing it. That was the big issue, and we're going to be voting on this again on February 15th of 2014. Now, going back, yeah, that was part of the thing, because this was someone who felt so strongly about Obamacare. And keep in mind, the issue here is socializing medicine. Everyone admits that Obamacare is aimed toward a single-payer system. By definition, a single-payer system is socialized medicine, such as they have in UK or in Canada. So he felt strongly enough about it, and several of the rest of us did, that we took that step to do it.
When you say he, that's Senator Ted Cruz.
Well, there are 12 of us. I was one of the 12.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm guilty.
The public doesn't know what goes on behind closed doors, do they? The back and forth you might have with senators, your caucus meetings. And by the way, here's a question. What's the difference between a caucus meeting and a committee meeting? How are they different in the way they operate?
A caucus is geared toward membership. The Republicans have a caucus every week. The Democrats have a caucus every week on Tuesday during the lunch hour. It's called the Weekly Republican Caucus and Weekly Democrat Caucus. Now, that's strictly just the members, just Republicans and just the ones that Republicans agree in terms of staff who is invited in. Who do they trust? The committee is something that, generally speaking, is public. It's televised, and people know when you have a defense authorization bill, you have that, except for what happened yesterday. Those are all public. They're live on TV. You can go into executive session in a committee. It's rare that they do it, but they do it in such case that address personnel problems, things that they don't want out in the public because someone's life can be ruined by accusations that they find out later on were not real. But a committee deals with subjects. A caucus deals with membership.
Did you ever in your days way back when in the state Senate and House think that you would become a United States Senator? Was that a
No,
goal of yours?
It never was. In fact, I've always said when people talk about term limits, they should really talk about a person before that person is qualified to run for the Congress, either house, should have to live in this real world for at least 10 years and make a legitimate living to know how tough it is on the outside. We have too many people who've gone straight from the fraternity house to Congress. So if there's a problem, what do? Just regulate it more. So I've often said that you should have to be beat up by the bureaucracy for at least 10 years before you can run. In my case, it was 20 years. And it was evident when I got there initially to the House how few people would ever work for the living. More today, a larger percentage than used to.
So then
no, I didn't have any idea. I ran for the state legislature. That was a part-time job. Never did a full-time job until I ran for the United States Congress, because there are always part-time jobs. Even mayor of Tulsa was. So I enjoyed being in the real world, competing at the same time, part-time political positions.
Does it bother you when you see people who are posing as conservative? You know they're really not, but they're posing to get elected. I think you kind of referred to this earlier. And then you're dealing with them. Does that cause you a problem?
Let me share with you, there's a person that was a very, very liberal person. It's Mike Sinar. Mike Sinar is deceased now. I like Mike Sinar. He was a very, very liberal person. I mean, he admitted he enjoyed being liberal. He was an honest liberal. One time I said, Mike, how can you vote for these things and still be from Oklahoma? He said, it's easy. You vote liberal and your press release conservative. Well, he's being honest with that. Because I can name names in the United States Senate of very liberal Democrats who you never hear anything except conservative stuff back home. Look what's happening, and I won't mention it because the 2014 election will be coming up. There are quite a few senators that you read about every day that are Democrat incumbent senators who are trying to paint themselves as conservatives back home because they're from states that are called red states. Now, here's the fallacy in that argument. The majority determines who is the leadership. So if you want Nancy Pelosi to lead the United States House of Representatives, you want to send a majority of the Democrats in. But the Democrats who oppose as conservatives back home, you have to ask them this question. Who are you going to vote for to be the Speaker of the House? And they have to say Nancy Pelosi or a liberal Democrat. So, yeah, there are a lot of them out there that follow that theory. And while it's interesting, and this is a good thing to pose to a lot of the students and people that consider themselves as students of politics, there are a lot of them who vote liberal and press release conservative. I don't know of one, nor can I remember of one in the history of the time I've been there, who votes conservative and press releases liberal.
You recently interjected yourself into the Tulsa mayoral race. You supported Dewey Bartlett. You and other Republicans thought enough to come to a mayoral race in the city of Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And why did you do that?
First of all, I did not get involved in the primary. Bill Christensen was running against Dewey Bartlett, and I told both of them I was not going to be involved in the primary. When Bill Christensen came out and supported Kathy Taylor in the general election, and the Keatings also, I thought, gosh, I should have gotten involved in that. Several of them thought that she was going to win, and she was kind of the money candidate, so they kind of wanted to be on the ground floor. Having been a mayor, I did it for two reasons. One is, of my 20 kids and grandkids, all but 6 live in Tulsa. And so I've got a dog in this fight. I mean, I really want good things to happen. I wanted to be in a position where I could advise the mayor to do a lot of things through the private sector that they have not been doing. So I had that prejudice. And in this case, because it was Kathy Taylor, and she's someone who didn't have the roots in Oklahoma and was spending huge amounts of money, I got involved in the race because in my household alone, we'd get as many as 2 and 3 a day from her, the full color stuff and all that. So I got involved.
Well, here's a case, and you referred to this earlier, where you ran against Frank Keating, and he had the country club in, but you had the workers, because Kathy Taylor spent $3 million on this race, and as I recall, Dewey Bartlett spent $900,000. So it's an interesting case for anybody who studies political science, that money doesn't always work.
You can overspend, and I think she was guilty of overspending, and it became visible to people. So it's a fine line. If you have unlimited money to spend, You have to decide where is that point where it's going to be obvious I'm buying an election. And that's the easy way. You go out and you organize every precinct. You do that. That's hard work. People would generally fall down on the easy side. So I just think that people now are aware of, and I think that probably in that particular race, she was perceived as buying a race.
Now you're gearing up for another race.
I am.
Should be the last one that you ever have to run again. You've already started, I would imagine. We're a year away from that election.
I'll tell you when I started, and I think it fits into your conversation here. I was not going to run. Kay and I had talked about this. We did some developing down in South Texas. We like to go down there. We have a place at the lake that we built in 1962. We really enjoy that. And what I do is not as easy as people think. It's really long hours and it's hard. But a year ago in the November election of 2012, I was the dumbest guy in town. Up until 7 o'clock that night, I was on national TV saying there's no way in the world we're going to reelect Obama, now that people know that he has rejected those things which made America great. And I'm talking about such things as a strong national defense, such things as being totally energy independent, which we could be. But he has a war on fossil fuels, such things as overregulation that's running people into the ground. And I thought it wasn't going to happen. But that night, when it happened, we decided we were going to run. And one reason, there are 3 areas that I'm willing to do things that no other senators are. I don't know why it is, but no other senator is going to say that Obama has disarmed America through his policies and what he's done to the military. I can document that. Everybody knows that it's true, but they won't take that position. It's not a popular position. The second thing is taking the position on total independence for running ourselves in terms of energy. And it's because a lot of the far-left environmentalists want to do away with fossil fuels, and you can't run the machine called America without it. And the third thing is talking about the regulations. So I would say to you, or anyone who happens to be listening to us, find a senator who's willing to take on those 3 issues. But I wasn't able to do that. And so I thought, I'm going to do it. And I'm heading up those 3 causes today.
So are you saying that if Mitt Romney was elected president and defeated Obama,
I probably would not have run? I don't say definitely because I would have been tempted. Because if we had won a majority, that would have changed things. But if he had won and we had not won control of the United States Senate, I probably would not have run, even though we won the White House.
Advice to students, would-be politicians, they want to get into this world. Would you suggest they do it? Or what
let me suggest, John, and I know I'm right on this, but some people won't appreciate it. A student, say someone in college, first of all, decide what you stand for. And once you do that, you decide whether you're liberal or conservative, and those are not dirty words. A liberal means that government should be involved in more of our everyday life. A conservative believes that government's already involved in too much of our lives. It's very simple. You decide where you are, what the role of government should be. Then once you decide that, start looking around for state races, like state legislative races. Before you run yourself, you have to pay your dues. You have to get out and start helping someone run. You love them, you stand for what they stand for, and you get involved in those races. Then the opportunity will come if you're one who really believes and is willing to do that. That's why I believe the party system is so misunderstood. But in a way, there's no other country in the world that has a system like we have. The Democrats, in what they stand for, and the Republicans, what they stand for, all starts in some living room in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, where they have their gathering. It's called a little caucus, where people get together and say, all right, we're in this precinct. I'm a Republican in this precinct. I think Republicans should be conservative. I think that should be for gun owners, Second Amendment rights, and all this stuff. Now, across the street, the Democrats are having theirs. They're saying we're pro-abortion. We don't believe in gun owners' rights, and they decide what they stand for. They do something very significant at that block meeting. They decide who's going to go to the county convention. And when the county convention gets here, it's made up of people who have sold themselves and others in that neighborhood on a way of government. So they decide at the county convention who goes to the district convention. Every other election, there's a district convention. And that's at the 6 congressional districts. This is the interesting thing. Then they decide who's going to the state convention, who's going to go to the national convention. Each level that goes up, the Republican Party becomes more conservative because they're the activists. On the other side, you find the Democrats, their activists are the liberals. And so by the time you get to the National Convention, we know clearly who stands for what. That's a long way around the barn, but I'm saying the system doesn't happen anywhere else. So those people who go there and are the ones who represent the philosophies are the extremes on both ends. And it works. The worst thing the Republicans can do would be to have a third party come in and say, well, you're not conservative enough. That happened. That's how Ross Perot threw Bill Clinton in. He wouldn't have won if it had not been for a third party.
It's interesting in the state of Oklahoma, a red state, meaning a Republican state, there still are more Democrats registered than Republicans.
Yeah.
And so you're asking Democrats to vote for you, and they obviously have. It's interesting that
because
phenomenon.
The Democrats in Oklahoma and in most red states, it's kind of a religion. They've always been Democrats. So you can still go to some counties in Oklahoma where it's really lopsided, but they're very strong conservatives. But they're very proud Democrats. And if you were to say to a Democrat, to most Democrats, well, you're a Democrat in Oklahoma. Do you believe in the Second Amendment rights? Oh, yeah. Oh, wait a minute. You read what is adopted by the Democrat Party. They don't believe that. So you're really not. Oh, yeah, but I am. Well, do you believe in the death penalty? Oh, yeah. But wait a minute. Go read what the Democrats stand for. Look at Arkansas. It's the same thing as Oklahoma, except they're 2 years behind us. I can remember when there's one Republican, John Paul Hammersmith, was the only Republican in the congressional delegation of the state of Arkansas. And he was pretty moderate. I love the guy. He's still living. He's a good guy and all that. Now they're all Democrats.
Al Snipes, who I referred to earlier and really got the Republicans going back in the 60s, he said, I still want a two-party state. And I said, oh, you want even registration? He said, yes, but I want one to be Republican. So it'd be one more. He's 89 years old, and he still wants this to be a two-party state.
Well, I agree with him. Otherwise, what is a party? What do you stand for?
Yeah.
And isn't that amazing, though, that it starts in 2 living rooms, and it goes all the way up to the National Convention. And the philosophies are all in what they pass, in resolutions. What do we stand for?
Yeah. It's a great system, isn't it?
It is. It's a great system.
How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, probably a father first.
You have a great reputation of being a family man. Nobody can deny that, whether they're for you or against you or have been violently opposed, even voted against you. There's no question about that. So that would be...
Yeah, because I think the family unit is what it's all about. And then consistent, because you have so many people who will change their position because the public has changed its position. And there's no better example of this than global warming. How many people, they're so afraid of that issue, scared to death. And yet it's easy. I can remember when I did the discharge petition in 1993 in the House. That was the most single significant reform. Almost every Democrat in the final analysis had to vote for it. One of them literally held his nose and voted for it. I remember that because I was watching.
Any particular names like Hillary Clinton? Do you have a relationship with her, friendship at all?
Not so much with her because we officed next door to each other when she was in the Senate. And with that, a lot of staff-driven animosity was there. And this issue I mentioned of the Kyoto Treaty was one that has driven us apart. But there are a lot of them that we're really close to. I mentioned Harry Reid, and Republicans get upset with me sometimes. But I understand his job, what he has to do to be the leader. And I think he's light years better than Tom Daschle was when he had that job. But it's still the personal thing. You can have a personal relationship with someone and truly love someone who you disagree with philosophically.
Yeah. There's such contentiousness in Washington now in 2013.
I can name some other names. Who comes to the mind of most people who are listening to us right now is the most liberal member of the United States Senate, a Democrat? It would be Bernie Sanders from Vermont. He is on the ballot as a socialist. And yet, if you were to ask him who his favorite conservative Republican is, I bet you'd say me. I would tell you something that happened. This is a true story. We had Obama in the White House first year, so we had the House and the Senate. That means anything they could pass. And what they were trying to do was do something really punitive on oil companies. It was right after the tragedy in the Gulf, and they were trying to do something that would have actually done away with all of America's participation, and the only countries that would be able to drill would be China and Venezuela. That's how serious it was. And so they're down there, and Bernie Sanders had a giant check on how much money Exxon made this last year. And look how they're rich and they're ripping off. It's class warfare. They were getting ready to vote on this thing that he introduced as an amendment. And if that happened, it would have sailed through the House. That was Nancy Pelosi's house. The president would have signed it. I literally ran down and challenged him on this thing. We debated this thing. We ultimately had a vote, and I won by almost 2-1. But if I hadn't gone down, it would have passed. After that was over, he came up to me, not all that privately. I said, Inhofe, I want you to know in the years I've been in the Senate, that was the healthiest debate I've ever been involved in, because we both believed in our cause. Barbara Boxer and I are close. So I've got a lot of people that are philosophically entrenched on the other side.
Presidents, any presidential stories, presidents that you've personally engaged with? You can go back. Gerald Ford, I know, came here and he campaigned for you. But are there any presidential stories, personal ones that you have?
Well, the personal ones all go back to Reagan because of the early relationship that we had. But then George II, I became pretty close to him. I didn't so much George I because that was back when there was a conflict, but he was the more moderate of the two, going all the way back to Reagan. But George II was one that I became very close to. One reason was I have something that I do every weekend that I'm here. Now, generally on every fifth or sixth weekend, I'll be someplace like Africa or Afghanistan or someplace like that. But the rest of them, I'm back in Oklahoma. And I pride myself in wanting to do something that I know that other senators are not doing. I know that Chuck, our friend from New York, is not doing.
Chuck Schumer.
So I will go up with all my kids and grandkids. I supply them with all their wood. I cut down the trees, split all the wood, and do that because I know that Chuck Schumer's not doing that. and the reason I do that is because that allows me to do something that is normal. The problem I've seen, and this happened with Dave McCurdy, he just moved to Washington. He became one of them. When people forget, they forget where they came from. And so the way I remind myself of where I came from is I cut all their wood and I do all this stuff. That's why I was mowing my field 4 days after my open heart surgery. I wanted to get out of there.
Well, I want to thank you for taking this time for this website, which is recording voices and preserving Oklahoma's legacy one voice at a time, and yours needs to be preserved, and I thank you.
No, I agree with what you're doing. I think that no one's done that before, and I'm glad you are. I would have felt left out if I had not been a part of this, so that's why we scheduled this time.
Very good. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it very much.
You bet.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast. Stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.